books for both the grown-ups and the kids, especially the kids' book here, that we have a book on dinosaurs, and get them started in the right direction. And Pastor, I'll turn it over to you. Yes.
Question.
Okay, Q&A.
Questions.
Loch Ness Monster, very good question. I'm a skeptic about Loch Ness Monster. The fact is that all of the deep water lakes in the world have their monster stories. So, for example, Lake Champlain here in the United States, guess what? They have their monster stories and all. And the monsters have always been cryptic, never really get a good look at them. And in regard to Loch Ness, I used to live in England, and I went by Loch Ness 3 different times, never saw Nessie. This is back when I was a kid. But the point is that the best photograph they had of Loch Ness Monster turned out to be fake. And this is a photograph that was around for decades. And so, as I say, I'm a skeptic. Let's go ahead and catch a Loch Ness Monster and take it to the San Diego Zoo. And then I'll be a believer. Okay. And so, you're going to have to show me the Loch Ness Monster. I don't believe that they exist. Long and short of it. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
This morning you talked about the different kinds of how people create.
Right.
Yeah,
you're talking a little bit more about classification as to what we call in creation science baraminology. Baraminology is the baramin. Okay, that's the different kinds of animals. And I don't want to get too much into the detail about that because there's still a lot of discussion about how we interpret the baramin and all. But it looks like the baramin is related to the kind, and that would be about the family level. So you remember in your high school biology, you learned about classification. You go from phylum, order, class, family, genus, species. And so species is the most distinct classification of something. Genus is the second highest, and then we get up to family. And so the family level seems to be what God was getting at when he talks about the kinds of animals there. So we have the horse kind, cattle kind, that type of thing. And so those seem to be what the Lord is talking about. And it's hard to say how many different kinds of dinosaurs there are for a number of reasons, but one is when you understand if they're the same kind, it is that they can reproduce, right? Well, you can't get dinosaur fossils to reproduce, and so you have to make an educated guess on that. And so, there's still a little bit of room to maneuver on that, but that's what we're doing right now. It's called baraminology, and the way that we would classify these creatures. And as a matter of fact, that's where we have a little bit of overlap with the evolutionary community. So we don't dismiss evolutionary classification out of hand, but we say that when ultimately they all reproduce after their kind, and one kind does not become another kind. Classic case in point would be birds and dinosaurs. We have varieties of dinosaurs, we have varieties of birds, but one never became the other because God created after their kind. Okay. I don't know if I answered your question on that completely. Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
After the worldwide flood, how did we get salt water and fresh water? Was it only fresh water first?
Yeah. How did we get fresh water and salt water? That's a great question. Are there any other questions? No. So what we look at as, at the end of the Genesis flood, God, the waters came off of the continents and all that. And then we had orogeny. Orogeny is mountain building. And we understand that probably happened pretty quickly. Guess who now is saying that orogeny on occasion can happen quickly? The evolutionary community. And so what we find is that during time with rain and erosion and all, you would have the solutes from the dirt and all that come down into the oceanic basin there, and you would get accumulation levels of salt there, whereas in some other areas you would have just fresh water that would occur where you didn't have that kind of erosion. And so even evolutionists would agree with that. So this goes back to how much sodium was in the water in the pre-flood world. Well, there's no way of telling. You have to go back in a time machine and make the measurements and all that. But it looks like maybe the waters of the pre-flood world were kind of briny. You know what I mean by brine? That's kind of a cross between freshwater and oceanic water. You get that area of brine there. And we have creatures that can live equally fine within oceanic waters, which are very high saline, and freshwater. Who can think of a fish is like that? Yeah, the salmon. So when the salmon migrates, it migrates up to where it spawned, where it first was, the eggs were laid there in purely fresh water, but they spend most of their time in highly saline, sodium-filled oceans there. And so we think that there's something there when we talk about the separation of the salt water and the fresh water, and that animals and a lot of invertebrates like crabs can live equally within the two there. So during the thousands of years, we get a separation of those waters, and especially the erosion from off the continents would increase the sodium content of the oceans and leave the fresh water relatively untouched. So there's still work to be done on that, but good question. I haven't had that question in a long time. Yes, ma'am.
So what is the Institute for Creation Research? What is their stance on the 8 species of humans and how people are getting results with Neanderthal DNA, stuff like that?
What was the first part of that? Neanderthals?
Stance on like the 8 species of humans. Like,
The 8 species?
yeah. Like, you know how they say there's 8 different species of Homo?
Oh. Okay. Yeah, okay. And Homo, especially, okay, for example, the Neanderthals. Back when I was in your age, well, that was a long time ago. But anyway, I was taught that Neanderthals were a missing link. And that's because Neanderthals had a heavy brow ridge and a sloping forehead. And that was one of the things that they would explain as to human evolution. Except there is a member of the Russian parliament that looks like so much like a Neanderthal, it's almost comical. I forget his name, but he's alive today in the Russian parliament. And he has a sloping forehead, a heavy brow ridge. I'm sure he gets a lot of ribbing, but he's a 100% human being. As a matter of fact, Neanderthals had a cranial capacity that exceeded that of modern man. So Neanderthal man, it wasn't some kind of subhuman ancestor. They were, as you say, Homo neanderthalensis. They belonged to the genus Homo, and we are Homo sapiens. And so, they are 100% human beings. So I don't know about the various different kinds of species, except that with the genus Homo, we would say that they would be able to interbreed. And so evolutionists are now finding evidence that that's true. But we would say that Homo neanderthalensis, Neanderthal man, were simply a people group, just like we have various people groups today. Notice I didn't use the word races. There's only one race, and there's 2 races, the human race and the rat race. Rats are winning. But anyway, there's only one race, and that's a human race, okay? And so people beget people, and it looks like Neanderthals were a pre-flood group, and that they didn't make it through the flood. And so, it's hard to say because there's not too much fossil evidence in that respect.
Except for the guy in Russia.
Yeah, that guy in Russia, he kind of slipped through the cracks there. But you might want to look that up in Google Images. Yeah, it's what's a scientific word? Spooky. It's really spooky. Look at that. So did I answer your question?
Yeah. So just different.
Yeah, different people groups, right. And so, like, for example, Australopithecus afarensis, as I mentioned earlier, that's Lucy. Boy, it was a big deal. Especially when I was in graduate school in the 1980s. Lucy was a missing link for sure. Well, Lucy, as it turns out, to make this quick, had long arms, long legs, long fingers. Everything about Lucy was ape-like. It had an ape-like skull, ape-like size of the brain and all that. So why were they calling it a missing link? Because it looked like part of the time, with its pelvic anatomy, that she might have walked upright. That was the litmus test for evolutionists. Lucy probably walked upright. Can we say that definitively? No, because Lucy lived about 3 million years ago. So nobody actually saw Lucy walking upright, okay? So that's the thing to keep in mind. But there's another thing that evolutionists don't like to talk about, and that is, on occasion, the living pygmy chimpanzee will walk upright. You can tell she doesn't like to, but about 10% of the time, the living pygmy chimpanzee will walk upright. Well, the pygmy chimpanzee is 100% chimpanzee. And so we believe that what evolutionists found, that's something I wrote about in the book over there, is that they found fossils, plural, of extinct species of ape. And that's all Lucy was. And so we can go down the laundry list of these so-called missing links, and they're very, very logical explanations. They're either apes or they're people. But when they find the shattered remains of some hominid that you really can't tell what it is, then they say what? Oh, it's a missing link. Well, it's hard to say it isn't because you don't have that much to deal with and to work with. But when all the evidence finally shows up, if it ever does, you can either classify it as one or the other. So that's a down and dirty answer, but really that's the way it is. And I'd urge you to check out some of the books there. So I guess maybe one more question and we're done. Yes, sir.
Scripture tells us that all of the people pre-flood lived 700, 800, 900 years.
Yeah.
After that, there's a degradation of it, and it's pretty accelerated.
Yeah.
I see I have an explanation for that.
Well, we're not sure why that is, although, yeah, as a zoologist, I can tell you there's no compelling reason why we ever age and get old and die, because the cellular makeup of our bodies are such that they self-repair. And they keep on repairing. And there it gets into genetics. For example, the DNA molecule and the chromosomes that we have has sections of DNA called telomeres. Have you ever heard of telomeres? Well, as we age, the telomeres at the ends of our chromosome get smaller and smaller, shorter and shorter, and that's called aging. And so that's, some scientists are talking about, well, maybe, telomeres are very extended under certain conditions. But it looks like perhaps that the conditions were unique in the pre-flood world, maybe a higher oxygen content, a number of other conditions as well, nutrition. We're really not sure, because once again, we would have to go in a time machine to kind of check out what the pre-flood world was like. But Scripture is very, very clear about how old people were living back then. And again, from a biological, a zoological perspective, there's no reason why we should age so rapidly today. And then after the flood, yeah, it looks like there's a precipitous decline of the age of the patriarchs.
So Scripture indicates that there was no rain prior to it. That's a debatable question.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
The ground was watered from underneath.
Right.
And from the dew. If we were in a terrarium sort of environment, it would reduce radiation, which kills cell reproduction.
Yeah.
I listened to some expert on NPR once, when there was nothing else I could get on the radio. And his life study was on mortality.
Yeah.
The lady asked the money question, what's the bottom line of all your study? He said was that the sun kills man's ability to reproduce. Most men, it's impossible to live past 120 years. Well, that happens to match God's proclamation in Genesis 5.
Yes.
He declares, I'm done with this.
Mm-hmm.
Man has proven his sin, and that's a whole other discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But his days will be 120.
Yeah.
And so I was just trying to figure out if you guys have done any research or tried to sort that out.
Yeah, we haven't, but Norm, that is a very good question, longevity, factor, and of course we can read about that in Genesis and just plot it out, and
it's a point of contention for non-believers when you start talking about people might not be old.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have some scientific response to it.
Absolutely. And, we have some support from a very, very unlikely source, and that is evolutionists themselves. They agree that there are animals today that, as far as we can tell, live forever. And that is a species of invertebrate that you might have dissected in your biology class. I forget the name of it. It's, what is it? It's an invertebrate. It has a polyp and various stages and all that, but there's no way of really looking at saying this individual one is unique. It isn't. It just keeps on reproducing and reproducing as the original kind, unlike vertebrates, humans, and other animals that are vertebrates. But evolutionists do say that there's no compelling reason why we can't live forever because of the amount of cellular metabolism and repair and everything else that goes on. And so, the sun is showering us with various kinds of energy that causes the DNA in our cells to be corrupted. We call them mutations, but then there's also other types of cellular degradation in terms of the DNA that are cause problems as well. But then again, what the Creator has done, this is a whole different presentation. I have a presentation on what's called repair enzymes. And these repair enzymes, these little proteins, just think of a white of an egg. And make it submicroscopic, and then have that white of an egg that's submicroscopic, so unbelievably tiny, going up and down your DNA, the spiral helix of your DNA molecule, and it's going up and down the DNA looking for mistakes. In biology and zoology, we call them lesions. A lesion is different than a mutation. And this tiny submicroscopic bit of protein is programmed to find a lesion, a mistake, and then call in other enzymes to help effect the repair of that lesion through something we call in biochemistry dehydration synthesis. Molecule of water is carved out and then it's reattached in ways that we're only just beginning to understand. And so it's a whole family of these repair enzymes that right now as we're sitting here, your DNA is being repaired by these repair enzymes. Lots and lots of them, and it's unbelievably complex. And this is why it's very difficult for the evolutionist to explain how you can get the naturalistic accumulation of nucleotides, which are the functional unit of a DNA molecule, just come together and begin to code for a protein. Well, you need those repair enzymes because this light energy from the sun is messing it up, and then also radiation from below is messing it up. Perfect conditions for the revolution of life. Radiation from below, UV light, just absolutely a huge amount of UV light striking the water from below and above, and that's how you're going to get the evolution of life from non-life. I don't think so. But even if you do get life, where are those repair enzymes coming from? They also need to be programmed by, ironically, DNA. So it's a classic chicken egg kind of a situation. I don't want to get off on a rabbit trail there, but Norm, I agree. There is that decline there. And so this isn't a field where we need biblical researchers as much as scientific researchers to make a deduction there and to explain how we can get the incredible ages that we have there. And so we need Hebrew scholars as much as we need zoologists. So we're called, and I'll finish with this, Pastor, we're called the Institute for Creation Research. We're not the Institute for Creation Answers. We're still researching this whole field, and there's only 45 of us, and so we have our work cut out for us. And so please continue to pray for us. And Pastor, I want to say thank you so very much for having us, ICR, come here, and Lord bless.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Dr. Sherwin.
All right.
Yeah.